Hey guys, tonight we're going to unveil a historical secret, a mystery that has been hidden for centuries. You think you know Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who reigned alone for 45 years. Get ready, because the Queen you know is just an outer shell. Inside, there are 9 incredibly terrifying reasons, each one a dark story of psychological trauma, power, and loneliness. Behind her powerful appearance, we will see a woman obsessed with death, a strategist who used her very virginity as a weapon. You will never see Elizabeth I in the same way again. This is not just history. It is a journey deep into the mind of a monarch full of fears and mysteries. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please comment and let me know where you live and what the local time is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Reason number 1. The plot to murder Amy Robsart and Robert Dudley. Elizabeth was once deeply enamored with Robert Dudley, her childhood friend and lifelong confidant, the only man who ever awakened genuine stirring in her heart. When Elizabeth was 25 years old, she and Dudley secretly met within the royal court, savouring sweet moments by candlelight and the faint aroma of incense. Their whispered words drifted softly through the night like a lullaby, leading her to momentarily set aside the sacred duties of an empress. Under the wary eyes of courtiers, Elizabeth spent hours conversing with Dudley, stirring a whirlwind of gossip at court. Many officials whispered scandalously about the improper affair between the Queen and a courtier, yet Elizabeth remained steadfast, smiling quietly in the shadows, believing that her love for Dudley could overcome every obstacle. Then, on the dark day of the 8th of September, 1560, all her dreams abruptly shattered. Amy Robsart Dudley's wife was discovered unconscious at the foot of a staircase in Cumnor Place, her neck broken. The room lay silent and cold, servants having been sent away to a country fair. When they returned, Amy lay motionless, her hood still perfectly in place as if she had merely tripped. No one remained to witness the fall, leaving only the echo of hurried footsteps and the pounding of fearful hearts in the hush. News swept across the realm like a gale-driven leaf. People murmured that Robert Dudley had eliminated his own wife to clear his path to the Queen's favour. Rumours grew increasingly bizarre. Some claimed there was a secret passage from Amy's chamber directly to Dudley's, and that faint screams echoed through the halls on the night of her fall. The scandal reached beyond England's borders, horrifying diplomats in Paris, Madrid and Rome. The Spanish ambassador penned urgent dispatches to Madrid, describing the English Queen as one who would not hesitate to snuff out a life in pursuit of her personal desires. The French ambassador warned Paris of the Black Pearl within London's palace, compelling King Louis to reconsider any alliance. Within the royal court, trusted advisers urged Elizabeth to distance herself from Dudley, but her heart had become a raging sea of anger. For more than 3 months, Elizabeth immersed herself in fury, relentlessly questioning the circumstances of Amy's death, tears welling whenever Dudley's wife was mentioned. Every attempt at reassurance by her counsellors fell on deaf ears, for hatred had taken root deep in her veins. Meanwhile, contemporary physicians could not distinguish whether Amy's broken bones stemmed from violence or illness. Modern historians now suggest she may have suffered from breast cancer, rendering her bones as brittle as dry twigs, so fragile that even a minor slip could prove fatal. Yet 16th century society cared little for such theories. They only saw a death far too convenient for Dudley's ambitions. Amy Robsart's demise did not remain a private tragedy. It became a horrifying mark upon Elizabeth's psyche. It served as a stark warning. Marriage for her was inseparable from death and suffering. She had witnessed firsthand the catastrophic consequences of a love entangled with betrayal, and her vow never to wed anyone but Dudley, even as a grievous curse, became a protective barrier around her heart. As night fell and the candles dimmed, Elizabeth imagined Amy collapsing in solitude without a cry for help. That image etched itself into her memory, reminding her that even if she remained lonely for life, she would never allow another soul to penetrate her heart's defences so deeply. Her first love, once a source of euphoric sweetness, transformed into a smouldering wound, an ever-present reminder that the path of marriage was not meant for one who had witnessed such tragedy. From that fateful moment, Elizabeth understood that, apart from the only man whose actions had stained her life with blood, No one else deserved to hold her heart and happiness. For her, marriage from then on was the boundary between life and death, between love and crime. Thus, reason number 1 was indelibly carved into Elizabeth's soul, making her first love an eternal ember of pain that would never extinguish within her heart. Reason number 2, childhood trauma in the House of Horrors. Imagine drifting into the soft hush of a quiet night, your eyes growing heavy as you settle into a story that begins in the most unlikely of nurseries, a royal palace transformed into a house of horrors for a small child. This is reason number 2, the tale of Elizabeth's earliest traumas, and how they forged a fear of marriage that would endure her entire life. Elizabeth was scarcely 2 years old when she witnessed her mother, Anne Boleyn, taken away to execution on the 19th of May, 1536. One moment she was a beloved little princess, clinging to her mother's skirts. The next, she became a crownless child, stripped of status and security in a single cruel night. The courtroom whispers, the clank of chains, and the distant echo of the axe, all of it sank into Elizabeth's tender mind, like stones dropped into a silent well. Before she even understood the meaning of justice or mercy, Elizabeth watched Jane Seymour, her next stepmother, endure unimaginable agony. When Elizabeth was 4 years old, Jane Seymour died screaming in childbirth, 12 days after presenting Elizabeth's half-brother, Edward. Elizabeth would later recall the echo of her cries, the frantic bustle of doctors helpless in the face of infection, and the sudden emptiness that swallowed the once bustling household. Anne of Cleves followed a gentle woman who saved her life by agreeing to a sham divorce. Elizabeth, barely old enough to walk unassisted, saw her father use power and intimidation to force Anne's compliance. The little girl did not yet grasp the word manipulation, but she felt its chill when Anne quietly departed the palace, leaving only formal letters in her wake. Then came Catherine Howard, Elizabeth's final stepmother at the age of 8. A young bride, perhaps, barely 19 or 20, who played with her like a real mother might. Catherine's kindness offered Elizabeth a rare glimpse of maternal warmth. She felt safe enough to laugh, to play hide-and-seek among palace corridors, and to whisper secrets behind cushioned doors. But that solace was cut tragically short when Henry, her father, discovered Catherine's youthful indiscretions. Catherine was dragged screaming through the halls of Hampton Court, and on the 13th of February, 1542, she too lost her head. Elizabeth never again saw her stepmother's gentle face. In less than a decade, Elizabeth lost 3 mother figures, each death or forced departure, a brutal lesson that love and family could be destroyed without warning. Modern psychologists suggest she developed what we would now recognize as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Whenever marriage was mentioned, she would fall silent for hours, her mind flooded with ghostly memories of beheadings, weeping servants, and the cold glint of an executioner's blade. Each wedding in her court, each mention of a promised ring, became a trigger for Elizabeth's agony. The idea of standing before a crowd of ambassadors, pledging herself to another human being, brought back images of her first mother dragged to the scaffold and her last stepmother screaming as the axe fell. The palace walls themselves seemed to whisper warnings. Never trust in love, for it shall only betray you. In her childhood, Elizabeth learned that marriage for her family meant death. Her own mother's life snuffed out, her stepmother's womb, and then her life cruelly taken. Another stepmother forced into humiliation, a final stepmother executed for youthful mistakes. Love in her world was a public spectacle of betrayal and shame. As the years passed, Elizabeth turned these nightmares into self-defense. She refused to allow anyone else to hold power over her heart. The pain of watching mother after mother destroyed left her with the unshakable conviction that marriage was too dangerous, too fraught with peril to ever consider. Now, as you drift towards sleep, imagine Elizabeth standing alone in a dim corridor, the torches flickering like fleeting memories, her small hand brushing along cold stones. Each step reminds her of loss, each echo a promise that she would never again place her fate in another's hands. Such is reason number 2, the childhood trauma in the House of Horrors that froze Elizabeth's heart and steeled her against the possibility of marriage. For her, the word itself became synonymous with death, public humiliation, and the spectre of abandonment. And so she chose solitude over the risk of loving again. Reason number 3, the terror of childbirth. As you settle deeper into your chair, and the world around you softens into a gentle hush, let us drift into a nightmare that unfolded in the 16th century, a reality so grim that it shaped the destiny of a queen. This is reason number 3, the dreadful spectre of childbirth that haunted Elizabeth's every thought and drove her to shun marriage forever. In Elizabeth's time, the act of bringing new life into the world was fraught with peril. Historical records tell us that roughly 5% of women did not survive a single childbirth. That is 1 in 20, lost to complications beyond any midwife's control. For noble women and those of the court, expected to bear many children, the cumulative risk soared to 25% over their lifetime, the cruel price of securing a dynasty. Elizabeth bore witness to this horror in the flesh. She saw Jane Seymour, her stepmother, endure the most excruciating ordeal known to women of that era. 12 days after presenting Edward, the future king, to the court, Jane fell prey to what doctors would later call sepsis. Elizabeth, merely a child of 4, watched the life drain away from Jane's body as infection rotted her from within. The hallways echoed with Jane's agonized cries, and courtiers, foreign envoys, and uneasy onlookers stood vigil to confirm the birth of a legitimate heir. No one could quell the stench of illness, or staunch the flow of blackened blood. That harrowing vision, Jane writhing in pain before a crowd seared itself into Elizabeth's memory. The corridors of the palace, lined with marble and tapestries, seemed to carry the ghostly wails of childbirth long after Jane's passing. Elizabeth did not need to be told that childbirth was a gamble with death. She could feel the chill of mortality whenever a new baby's cry filled the air. In the aftermath, Elizabeth began to probe every nurse and midwife she encountered, her voice low and tremulous as she pressed them for details. She asked about each stage of labor, the signs of infection, the remedies they applied, and the odors that filled the birthing chamber. She inquired about every tool forceps, linens doused in vinegar, poultices of herbs, and how each could both save and doom a mother. The nurses, uneasy under her gaze, would describe the gruesome scenes, days of agonized pushing, fevers that left women delirious, blood-soaked sheets that could not be washed clean. Compounding her terror was Elizabeth's own delicate constitution. Modern scholars suggest she may have suffered from severe menstrual disorders, perhaps endometriosis or polycystic ovary syndrome conditions, unknown to 16th century physicians, yet manifesting in crippling pain and irregular cycles. Every month, Elizabeth experienced cramps so violent that she feared her body was rebelling against her own survival. She grew convinced that the ordeal of pregnancy would dwarf her existing agony, that each contraction would be a testament to her own fragility. In her mind, pregnancy was not a miraculous blessing, but a death sentence awaiting execution. She imagined the moment when labor would begin, when sheets would be drenched in sweat and blood, walls echoing her screams, attending midwives scrambling to call for help that might not arrive in time. She foresaw the moment her own life might slip away, abandoned on a cold pallet, her infant unborn or left motherless. As the sun dipped below the horizon each evening, Elizabeth would shudder at the memory of Jane's final hours. She pictured the courtyard outside the palace, silent save for the tolling of the midnight bell marking another noblewoman lost to childbirth. She recalled the sight of pallbearers carrying a coffin to Street, George's Chapel, the hush of a saddened court, and the unspoken dread that the next procession might bear Elizabeth's own casket. Thus, childbirth became a monstrous spectre that she could never exorcise. It tainted every thought of marriage with fear so profound that it outshone the warmest promise of love. Elizabeth concluded that to wed was to gamble with her life and her kingdom's future. Should she perish in labour, England would be left vulnerable, a realm teetering on the brink of chaos with no sovereign to guide it. So Elizabeth chose a different path. She would remain unwed, forsaking the role of mother to protect both herself and her country. In her mind, solitude was preferable to the cruelty of childbirth's roulette. The very word marriage conjured the echo of Jane's screams and the sight of blood on silk. It became for Elizabeth an ordeal too terrifying to embrace a path she closed off at all costs. And so, reason number 3, the terror of childbirth sealed Elizabeth's fate as the Virgin Queen, a title born not of piety alone, but of profound dread, shaped by the vivid horrors of life's most primal act. Reason number 4, the obsession with power and absolute control. As your eyelids grow heavy and the world outside drifts into stillness, let us enter the quiet corridors of Hampton Court Palace, where reason number 4 took root in Elizabeth's mind, her haunting fear of sharing power and her unrelenting urge to control every aspect of her realm. In the 16th century, marriage for a woman of status was not merely a joining of hearts, but the legal transfer of title, lands, and authority to her husband. Elizabeth, ever shrewd and aware of the law's every nuance, knew that uttering the words "I do" would instantly elevate her consort to co-ruler, possibly with equal or even greater power than she herself possessed. The very thought of surrendering an ounce of her sovereign authority sent a chill through her, for she had fought tirelessly to secure the crown that was her birthright. Within the palace's gilded walls, Elizabeth operated a system of surveillance rivaling any spy network. She required every lady-in-waiting and court official, even those of the humblest station, to petition for royal permission before considering marriage. A single clandestine betrothal could be deemed an act of treason, resulting in imprisonment within the fortress of the Tower of London. Those bold enough to wed without consent found themselves shackled, their private vows sacrificed on the altar of royal prerogative. Her circle of favourites, those courtiers who basked in her favour and influence, were expressly forbidden from taking spouses. For Elizabeth, no relationship outside her immediate control could be allowed to flourish, for she feared that a husband might claim allegiance from a favourite's heart, thereby drawing their loyalty away from her throne. She subjected each prospective suitor to rigorous interrogation, not about his lineage or his affection, but about the precise measure of authority he expected to wield once he stood beside her at the altar. Elizabeth extended marriage negotiations across months, sometimes years, using them as diplomatic chess moves. She dangled the prospect of marriage with a Catholic prince to unnerve Protestant rivals, then hinted at a Protestant alliance to confound Catholic powers. Each overture served less as genuine courtship and more as leverage in the intricate dance of European politics. Foreign ambassadors arrived with lavish gifts and elaborate dowry offers, only to depart empty-handed, their hopes dashed but their coffers lighter. At the heart of her strategy lay a single, absolute conviction. She would rather see England invaded and its people subjugated than share her throne with any man. Elizabeth confided in her closest advisers that she would choose national destruction over the dilution of her power. She understood that a husband, no matter how loyal, would legally possess rights to her lands, her decisions, and her legacy rights she could not abide relinquishing. In her speeches to Parliament, Elizabeth often emphasized her singular status as monarch, elevating herself above the traditional bonds of matrimony. She crafted public proclamations extolling her dedication solely to her subjects, declaring that her heart was married wholly to England. The phrase became a potent piece of royal propaganda, painting the image of a selfless ruler whose personal sacrifices justified her solitary reign. Yet behind the veil of political rhetoric lay Elizabeth's private dread. Scholars note that she monitored her court like a sovereign's hawk, ordering secret reports on who dined with whom, who exchanged letters, and who lingered too long in private chambers. Even the colour of courtiers' attire and the choice of dishes at state banquets fell under her scrutiny, subtle reminders that every detail of life in her realm must answer to her will. Foreign ambassadors soon learned that marriage negotiations with Elizabeth were perilous gambits, not sincere overtures. They spent lavish sums on diplomatic missions, only to discover that Elizabeth had no intention of ever uttering her wedding vows. Instead, she used the prolonged negotiations to extract military alliances, financial subsidies, and concessions on trade. Her own court grew accustomed to the existence of faux engagements, phantom proposals designed purely for leverage. The Queen's need for control extended even to mundane matters. She dictated which incense scents could be burned in the chapel, which flowers adorned the royal gardens, and which verses of scripture were read during Sunday worship. Every element of court life fell under her aegis, for she believed that any lapse in her absolute authority was an invitation to challenge her reign. Yet Elizabeth's methods carried a heavy price. Her courtiers lived in perpetual anxiety, fearing that a single misstep, an unapproved letter, a wedding gift sent without consultation, a whispered comment could result in disgrace or imprisonment. The palace became a tight-lipped fortress where trust was scarce and genuine affection nearly impossible. Those who sought to win her favour did so at the risk of losing their freedom. In her final years, Elizabeth's obsession with power reached its zenith. She refused to designate a husband or heir, viewing any relinquishment of her crown's sole sovereignty as an act of betrayal. This unyielding stance left the succession question unresolved, casting a long shadow over the realm and sowing seeds of uncertainty that would only be quelled after her passing. Thus, reason number 4, the obsession with power and absolute control drove Elizabeth to forsake the institution of marriage. Her fear of sharing authority, of permitting another soul to claim even a fraction of her sovereignty, proved more potent than the most fervent passions of romance. In the quiet hours before sleep, imagine Elizabeth pacing the marble floors of her private chambers, each step a testament to the iron-willed monarch who would rather rule alone than surrender her crown to any man. Reason number 5. The religious trap. Marriage as a catalyst for civil war. Imagine the weight of a crown borne not only by a single life, but by the fragile balance of an entire realm, teetering between faiths as fiercely opposed as fire and ice. This is reason number 5. The spectre of religious conflict that made marriage for Elizabeth not an opportunity for union, but a minefield threatening to erupt into civil war. In the 16th century, England lay rent in two. On one side, the Catholics, unwavering in their allegiance to Rome and the Pope's authority. On the other, the Protestants, championing the Reformation and the supremacy of the Church of England. Each faction viewed the Queen's choice of spouse as a divine endorsement of their faith, and each was prepared to fight for that endorsement. A single wedding, misaligned with either camp's expectations, could plunge the nation into a conflict far more savage than the Wars of the Roses. For the Catholics, the ideal match was a prince of their own creed, Philip, King of Spain, being the prime candidate. A union with a Catholic sovereign would herald the restoration of papal supremacy, the resurgence of Latin rights, and the reversal of Elizabeth's Protestant reforms. Conversely, the Protestants clamoured for an alliance with the fellow reformist prince, hoping to cement the Church of England's newfound independence. Both sides dangled threats of bloodshed, as if the Queen's nuptials were the very fuse of an explosive device. Elizabeth could not forget the reign of her half-sister, Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary, whose marriage to Philip wrought a 5-year reign of terror. Under her rule, nearly 300 Protestants were burned at the stake in the name of religious purity, leaving the land steeped in ashes and terror. The memory of those executions, of villages watching columns of smoke rise like grim beacons, haunted Elizabeth's mind. She understood that one misstep in her own marital choice could unleash horrors even worse than those Mary had wrought. Furthermore, the Pope himself had excommunicated Elizabeth and labelled her a crownless bastard, inciting Catholic powers to invade England to restore the true faith. At every court in Europe, ambassadors, Catholic and Protestant alike, sent frantic dispatches about Elizabeth's marriage prospects, as though each proposal were a declaration of war. If she said "I do" to a Catholic, Protestant nations would mobilize armies. If she pledged herself to a Protestant, Catholic Spain and the Holy League would descend upon her shores. Elizabeth wove this religious tension into a masterful diplomatic weapon. She dangled the prospect of marriage to a Protestant prince to intimidate Catholic rivals, then hinted at a Catholic alliance to unsettle Protestant forces. This delicate two-sided threat maintained a geopolitical stalemate for decades, compelling major powers to tread carefully rather than risk igniting a continental conflict. In this dance of devotion and deception, Elizabeth ensured that no single faction could claim her allegiance without provoking the other. Yet the constant brinkmanship exacted a heavy toll on the Queen's psyche. She confided in her closest counsellors that she dared not trust any whispered promise of marriage, for each whisper carried the weight of potential massacre in God's name. To Elizabeth, the phrase "I do" became synonymous with the crack of muskets, the clatter of armour, and the wails of the innocent caught in the crossfire. The very notion of matrimony transformed into a death trap, where the mixing of private vows and public faith threatened to spill the blood of thousands. In her sleepless nights, Elizabeth imagined England divided into battle lines, clergy chanting Mass on one hill, reformers preaching the New Testament on another, musketeers forming ranks between them. She foresaw churches aflame, farms pillaged, and families torn apart by the edicts of their sovereign's wedding chamber. Marriage, a union meant to heal and bind, instead loomed as the spark that could ignite an inferno of sectarian slaughter. This awareness steered Elizabeth away from any genuine commitment. She preferred the solitude of her unmarried sovereignty to the perilous alliance of a mixed-faith marriage. By remaining alone, she preserved the fragile peace, refusing to gamble her realm's stability on the personal desires of crown and consort. Thus, reason number 5 reveals the chilling truth. Elizabeth's fear of marriage was inseparable from her fear of religious civil war. In a kingdom riven by faith, her personal union might have been the final, fatal step toward national catastrophe. Better to rule alone than to watch England consumed by the flames of holy discord. Reason number 6. The foreign invasion nightmare. As you nestle into your blankets and the world outside fades into a dim glow, allow yourself to drift into Elizabeth's most haunting vision, one not of ghosts or distant dreams, but of armies amassing beyond the horizon. This is reason number 6. The fear that a single marriage could transform England into a vassal state or a colony of foreign powers. In the 16th century, dynastic unions were more than romantic gestures. They were the building blocks of empires. Elizabeth understood that when a queen married a foreign prince, she risked ceding not only her heart but her realm. Among the suitors who sent their lavish proposals to Whitehall, 2 stood above all others in danger: Philip II of Spain and various princes of France. Each letter of courtship carried within it the potential blueprint for an invasion. Philip II, once Elizabeth's brother-in-law through his union with her sister Mary, harboured designs on England long before Elizabeth ascended the throne. He commanded the mightiest navy of the era, its galleons bristling with cannon and laden with gold from the Americas. Should Elizabeth whisper her consent, England's fleet might find itself renamed Habsburg Squadron, its sailors bound to Philip's orders, and its tax coffers emptied to fund Spain's wars against Protestant rebels. Even as a child, Elizabeth heard whispers of Spain's wealth, the endless silver flowing from New World mines into the Spanish treasury. She saw how the Spanish crown used its riches to hire mercenaries, fortify ports, and bribe courtiers, tactics that left many a kingdom groaning under the weight of foreign gold. Elizabeth shivered at the thought. To wed Philip would be to sign a deed that placed England under another sovereign's thumb, its people drafted into campaigns far from home. France, too, loomed as a threat. The Valois dynasty eyed England as a strategic prize, eager to link the crowns of England, Scotland, and France, in a triad that could encircle Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. A Franco-English wedding would transform English ports into staging grounds for continental armies, and fields that once grew wheat would echo with the tread of foreign boots. In Elizabeth's mind, she heard the clamour of muskets and the cries of villagers, caught between rival armies drawn from her own proud soil. Mary, Queen of Scots, provided Elizabeth with a cautionary tale. Mary's marriage to a French prince turned Scotland into a battlefield, with English, French, and imperial forces vying for control. Elizabeth recalled the sight of Scottish villages ransacked, their fields burned, their people fleeing into the hills. She understood that a queen's nuptials could lead to decades of conflict, a nation left in ruins by alliances sealed at an altar. To guard against such calamity, Elizabeth demanded exhaustive analyses from her political advisers. She required dossiers on each suitor's family lineage, military strength, treasure reserves, and long-term strategic goals. Courtiers presented maps detailing every fortress along the Spanish coast, troop deployments in France, and shipping routes crossing the English Channel. Elizabeth pored over each document in the flickering candlelight, her brow furrowed as she contemplated the consequences of a single "I do." She once declared, before a hushed council, that she would rather die than see England reduced to a province of Spain or France. The very notion of surrendering her independence was more terrifying to her than any personal agony. She pictured her subjects as unwilling conscripts in foreign wars, their sons consigned to rivers of blood in lands they had never seen. England, she decreed, must remain free, or not at all. Yet Elizabeth's vigilance came at a cost. Every glance she cast toward a suitor was tinged with suspicion. She scrutinized the seals on each letter, the heraldry embroidered on each gift, fearful that beneath the ribbon might lie the key to an invasion plan. French ambassadors found themselves shadowed by royal spies. Their discussions reported back to Elizabeth before the ink on their dispatches could dry. The Queen's court became a fortress of whispers, where even the gift of a jewelled necklace was treated as evidence of political ambition. In her private moments, Elizabeth envisioned a single wedding march, leading to the triumphal entry of foreign banners in London. She could hear the clamour of trumpets and the roar of crowds, not cheering for their monarch, but for a king who would rule in her stead. The thought made her blood run cold, prompting sleepless nights spent pacing marble hallways, the stones cool beneath her slippers. Thus, reason number 6, the foreign invasion nightmare, wove itself into the tapestry of Elizabeth's fears. She saw marriage as a portal through which foreign armies might stream into English towns, a contract that could hand her crown to another ruler. In the end, she chose the solitude of spinsterhood over the risk of igniting a continental war. Better to remain unwed and keep England's independence intact than to seal allegiance with a prince and watch her kingdom slip from her hands. Now, as your thoughts drift towards sleep, recall the quiet might of Elizabeth's resolve. A queen who placed her realm's freedom above all else, even above her own happiness. Reason number 7. Obsessive-compulsive control. Imagine a mind so consumed by the need for absolute order that even the most intimate moments of her subjects' lives felt like threats to her reign. This is reason number 7. The obsessive-compulsive urge for control that drove Elizabeth to view every marriage, every conversation, and every bite of food at court as potential challenges to her authority. Elizabeth did not merely rule a kingdom. She orchestrated every detail of court life as though it were a grand, perpetual performance. In her world, a courtier's private wedding plans were as dangerous as enemy invasions. She believed that if any of her favourites, her trusted circle of advisers and confidants, were allowed to marry, their loyalties and attentions would fracture, forming factions that might one day rise against her. Marriage, in her eyes, was a diversion that threatened to annex the hearts of those she could least afford to share. To prevent such a calamity, Elizabeth issued a decree requiring every lady-in-waiting, gentleman usher, and even the humblest footman to petition for her permission before taking a spouse. An unsanctioned wedding was tantamount to treason. Offenders faced imprisonment in the Tower of London, their bonds riveted as cold and unyielding as the stone walls themselves. Under her rule, a secret engagement was as perilous as plotting rebellion. Her compulsion extended far beyond matrimonial matters. Elizabeth regulated the colour and cut of courtly gowns, dictating which hues were permissible for winter and which floral patterns would offend her sensibilities in summer. She demanded advance menus for every banquet, insisting on menu inspections to ensure no dish symbolized disloyalty or dissent. A single clove of garlic or a mischievous reference to a former lover hidden in a pastry's name could be construed as a sign of intrigue. Even whispers were monitored. Elizabeth employed a network of informants to eavesdrop on private conversations, suspending judgment on no one. Servants dared not confide their grievances, for every muttered complaint about royal policy could be reported back to her, sparking interrogation and punishment. She saw dissent as the first ripple of a tidal wave that might one day drown her throne. The Queen's favourites, those courtiers who basked in her favour and wielded influence, were held to an even higher standard. Should one of them dare to speak of marriage, they faced her ire. A notorious incident involved Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, who broached the subject of alliance beyond the bounds of service. Elizabeth responded with fury, banishing him from court and denying him audience for months. His hopes of domestic happiness were dashed, not by political necessity alone, but by her compulsion to keep his fealty unfragmented. For over a year, she would stall the issuance of any marriage license, then, at her whim, alter the regulations, introducing new requirements that made clandestine weddings nearly impossible. Couples abandoned dreams of family life, constrained by an ever-shifting web of decrees. Elizabeth's inconsistent edicts became the stuff of legend. One month, a suitor needed 5 signatures. The next it was 7. One year a dowry limit was enforced. The next it vanished without explanation. Modern historians liken her behaviour to a case of severe obsessive-compulsive disorder. Elizabeth could not tolerate the mere idea that anyone in her court might exercise a private life beyond her surveillance. She demanded that her realm operate like a finely tuned machine. Every gear, every courtier turned by her hand alone. Diplomacy, battlefield strategy, and kitchen utensils all fell within her realm of control. No element, however trivial, escaped her scrutiny. In her mind, marriage represented the greatest risk of all. To share her person with a husband was to open a door through which influence, ambition, and possibly treason could slip into her inner circle. A husband would inevitably bring his own supporters, his own loyalties, undermining the singular devotion Elizabeth demanded. Even the prospect of a royal wedding gown draped in foreign jewels made her chest tighten with dread. Thus, she chose lifelong spinsterhood as the only means to preserve her authority intact. By refusing to wed, she eliminated the possibility of divided loyalties, of spouses encroaching upon her prerogative. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the palace corridors lay shrouded in shadows, and the only sound was the soft rustle of her gown, Elizabeth would pace the halls, imagining the chaos that a single marriage could unleash. Her terror was not mere vanity or eccentricity, it was the desperate calculus of a monarch who knew too well that power shared is power diminished. The obsessive control that governed her courtward decisions was just as integral to her reign as the crown upon her head. And so, reason number 7, the obsessive-compulsive need for absolute control sealed Elizabeth's fate. In her quest to rule with unchallenged authority, she viewed marriage as an unacceptable risk, a crack in the foundation of her realm. As you drift towards sleep, envision Elizabeth standing alone in the stillness of the palace, her silhouette a testament to the lonely vigilance of a queen who would accept solitude over the perilous bonds of wedlock. Reason number 8, the Virgin Queen as a political ploy. As your head grows heavy and the world softens around you, let us drift into the realm of courtly intrigue, where reason number 8 reveals the most audacious stratagem of Elizabeth's reign, her elevation of virginity from personal vow to diplomatic weapon. While the public often believed that Elizabeth remained unwed out of piety or devotion to God, the truth was far more calculated. She crafted an image of herself as the Queen wed only to England, a sovereign whose chastity symbolized singular loyalty to her realm. Yet behind that facade lay a masterful political gambit. Elizabeth used the prospect of marriage to coax economic, military, and diplomatic concessions from foreign powers, without ever surrendering her personal sovereignty. For years, Elizabeth kept at least 3 suitors, princes of Spain, France, and other faiths dangling on her courtly hook. She would begin negotiations with lavish flourish, summoning Spanish envoys to Whitehall for months of formal banquets and ceremonial gift exchanges. The Spanish court, believing they had a genuine chance, poured funds into diplomatic missions, commissioning ships, funding ambassadors' lavish retinues, and showering Elizabeth's court with gold and silver. Yet when the time came for a proposal, Elizabeth would invoke her higher calling, or claim that Providence had destined her to serve England rather than marry. Next, she pivoted to France, hinting at matrimonial ties with a Valois prince. Again, French coffers emptied into the English treasury. Dowries were pledged, military alliances discussed, and grand tournaments staged in her honour. French envoys scribbled letters home, forecasting a union that would bind England and France in strength. But once more, Elizabeth smiled and revealed new conditions, delaying her decision for another year, while the treasury continued to swell. Her strategy forced each nation to compete for the privilege of becoming her consort. The diplomatic dance enriched England without costing an ounce of territory or a single company of soldiers. The Queen's purse, already brimming with customs revenue, overflowed with the unexpected windfalls of diplomatic engagements. Alliances were woven, treaties signed, and yet no husband ever crossed the threshold of her private chambers. Behind closed doors, Elizabeth would quip to her closest advisers about the outlandish gifts. Jeweled collars, tapestries depicting her portrait, even exotic beasts sent across the channel as tokens of affection. She delighted in recounting how each prince believed his overture was unique, how each court technician insisted their monarch would finally win her hand. All the while, Elizabeth's jest reminded her that her true prize was never a husband, but the power to demand more concessions. To extend the illusion of divine sanction, Elizabeth portrayed her virginity as a sacred bond between herself and her people. She claimed that God had chosen her to remain unwed, so that no earthly spouse might dilute her devotion to England. Questioning her marital status, she implied, was tantamount to questioning God's will, a dangerous heresy in an age that revered both crown and church. Thus, any diplomat who dared press the issue risked being labelled a rebel, a man who would defy the divine order for petty ambition. This ploy endured across 4 decades of Elizabeth's 40-year reign. No manual on dynastic policy could have taught a more effective lesson in leveraging matrimonial suspense. Generals and bankers alike found themselves sending subsidies to England, expecting that their prince's name would one day blazon alongside Elizabeth's on the title page of history. Yet each year passed, each delegation departed, and Elizabeth remained as she had sworn, a virgin, sovereign in her solitude. In the hush of night, Elizabeth must have reflected on the immense potency of this gambit. By vowing chastity, she inspired devotion not only from her subjects at home, but also from foreign courts desperate for alliance. Her virginity became the ultimate bargaining chip, worth more than armies or colonies. It extracted from Spain financial support for naval expansion, from France promises to defend Protestant interests, and from other realms their unfulfilled hopes. Thus, reason number 8 stands revealed. Elizabeth's use of her own chastity as political arsenal. She proved that the greatest marriages need not be solemnized with vows at all. Sometimes, the promise of one is enough to shape the destiny of nations. In the quiet corridors of power, her unbroken vow was the sharpest instrument in her diplomatic toolkit, a testament to her cunning, her resolve, and the enduring power of a queen who refused to Wednesday. Reason number 9. The ultimate selfish act, nearly destroying the dynasty. As dusk settles and your thoughts grow soft, imagine the weight of a lifetime's choices bearing down on a monarch's final days. This is reason number 9, the selfish decision that cast England into the brink of chaos. Elizabeth's refusal to wed or bear an heir, even as she knew her death without a successor, would unleash a dynastic crisis. Elizabeth understood all too well that, without a prince or princess ready to ascend, the 13 kingdoms might fracture into warring factions. Noble houses, each with their own claim and ambition, would marshal armies and press their rights to the crown. A childless queen was a beacon calling forth rival claimants, a spark threatening to ignite a conflagration of civil war. Her advisers, those closest to her throne, knelt and implored, "Appoint an heir, take a husband, secure the realm's future." They warned how uncertainty undermined commerce. Foreign merchants hesitated to invest when the next sovereign was unknown. English lords feared buying estates that might fall under a new ruler's scrutiny. Agriculture and trade stalled as landowners waited for clarity. Yet Elizabeth dismissed every entreaty. Sometimes she would laugh at their concerns. Other times she would erupt in rage, banishing those who dared broach the subject, labeling them traitors to her person and state. Despite the dire warnings, Elizabeth seemed to relish the suspense of her succession. Ambassadors from France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire scampered through palace corridors, delivering gilded gifts and whispered promises in hopes of currying favour for their royal bloodlines. Courtiers circulated eager rumours of secret meetings and covert agreements. The Queen's court became a stage for ceaseless intrigue, each participant desperate to secure a promise of future power. Elizabeth watched it all with cool amusement, as though it were a grand design meant solely to entertain her political genius. This prolonged ambiguity gave her an unparalleled tool for domestic control. No noble dared upset her favour, for his support might determine the next king, and gallant suitors from abroad trod lightly lest they be cast out. By keeping the question of succession unresolved, Elizabeth ensured that every faction leader, remained tethered to her goodwill. They spent fortunes supporting her court, advancing her causes, and whispering praises in her ear, actions designed to influence the Queen's choice, a choice she never intended to make. When Elizabeth finally breathed her last breath in the early days of March, 1603, England teetered on the brink. Claimants emerged from the shadows, descendants of Mary Tudor, remote Stuart cousins, and even foreign princes pressed their rights. Armies were mobilized in the north and south, banners unfurled along the Welsh marches, and foreign powers prepared to intervene under pretext of protecting their chosen claimant. Within days, London quivered under rumours of military coups, public protests, and economic boycotts. Corners of the city that once echoed with street vendors now resounded with the clank of armour and the cries of anxious citizens. Yet fortune smiled upon England in the form of James VI of Scotland, Elizabeth's cousin once removed and her designated heir in private council. His accession to the English throne as James I smoothed the transition and averted the worst predictions of civil war. He marched south in triumph, his banners welcoming him into London amidst guarded relief. But the relief was tinged with bitter memory. The kingdom had shuddered at the edge of collapse, its economic engines sputtering, its people weary from months of uncertainty. The scars of that crisis ran deep. Land values plummeted as investors remembered the paralysis of commerce under Elizabeth's indecision. The crown's revenues dipped, for merchants and nobility alike distrusted a regime that had toyed with succession like a child with a new toy. Politically, the event seeded suspicion among future rulers. They vowed never to repeat such a catastrophic gamble. Yet the memory persisted of a queen so consumed by personal conviction that she would risk an entire nation's stability rather than relinquish her solitary hold on power. Elizabeth's choice to remain unwed and childless was not an act of patriotic sacrifice, as later myth suggested, but the apotheosis of pathological self-interest. She valued her exclusive authority above her dynasty's continuity, above the welfare of her subjects, and above the very survival of her realm. By choosing to die alone, she nearly condemned England to bloodshed and foreign meddling, a price she was willing to pay to keep absolute power in her own hands. Thus, reason number 9 stands revealed: the ultimate selfish act. Elizabeth's refusal to marry or bear an heir nearly toppled her dynasty, showing that the greatest act of power can also be the gravest betrayal of one's own people. As you drift into slumber, consider this: a ruler's loneliness, when left unchecked, can become a weapon more dangerous than any sword or decree. Reason number 10. The loneliness and obsession with genuine connection. As your eyes grow heavy and the hush of night drapes over you like a velvet cloak, let us explore reason number 10, the most intimate and sorrowful motive behind Elizabeth's refusal to marry. Her profound loneliness and the haunting fear of ever finding a true, uncalculating bond. From her earliest days, Elizabeth's world was a tapestry of loss and suspicion. At the age of 2, she watched her mother, Anne Boleyn, led away to the scaffold, and in the years that followed, 3 more maternal figures, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, and Catherine Howard, departed her life through death or disgrace. Each departure carved away another piece of her trust, leaving her heart scarred by betrayal before she even learned to speak of love. In the shadows of the palace, she absorbed a single terrifying lesson: relationships are subject to the whims of power, and power cares nothing for affection. When Elizabeth ascended the throne, she carried that lesson like armor. She saw how Bennet, Cecil, and even her most loyal advisers could shift their allegiances when the tides of influence turned. She famously remarked to her courtiers that loyalty is a poison, for trusting the wrong person could inflict a wound deeper than any blade. In her court, friendships and romances were never free from political calculus. Every word was weighed, every gesture analysed for hidden ambition. Elizabeth feared not only betrayal once, but the bleak prospect that no connection she formed could ever be pure. She believed that anyone who approached her, whether as a suitor, a confidant, or a colleague, did so with motives woven from ambition, privilege, and self-interest. No one, she thought, could stand by her side for affection's sake alone. They all sought to secure favour, wealth, or status. In this relentless scrutiny, she found no comfort, only the echo of her own solitude. Robert Dudley was the exception, the singular soul to whom she dared reveal her vulnerabilities. Their secret trysts fueled rumours and risked scandal. Yet Elizabeth allowed herself a glimpse of hope that genuine love might exist beyond the palace walls. But when Dudley's entanglement led to Amy Robsart's tragic death and the ensuing disgrace, Elizabeth's heart shattered once more. She saw her confidant dragged into the mire of accusation, his reputation tarnished, his loyalty questioned. In that moment she understood that even the truest affection could be weaponized by those around them, turning love into ruin. Such pain cemented her belief that marriage was not merely a teat-yoke, an alliance of families and crowns, but a high-stakes gamble with her most precious assets, her power and her safety. To marry was to risk handing the reins of her emotional well-being to another person, someone whose loyalty could erode when it suited them. She refused to gamble her heart and her throne on the slender promise of fidelity in a world ruled by ambition. Night after night, Elizabeth paced the galleries of Whitehall, her silhouette dancing across marble floors as she replayed every broken promise, every shifting allegiance. She imagined the moment she might stand beside a husband, wearing the golden circlet of marriage, only to feel the void of genuine affection where companionship should dwell. That void terrified her more than the spectre of foreign invasion or dynastic collapse. In her solitude, the throne itself became her sole companion. Whereas others found comfort in family, Elizabeth embraced the crown as both protector and friend, constant, unchanging, and devoid of ulterior motives. It promised no betrayal, no emotional calculator passing every word for advantage. The throne's weight pressed upon her shoulders, but its solidity gave her the unwavering support she could not trust in any human being. Thus, beyond the 9 horrifying reasons we have traversed from the Dudley scandal to the question of succession, from the terror of childbirth to the politics of power, lies this deeply personal tragedy. Elizabeth's lifelong loneliness and suspicion made her incapable of believing in true love. She saw marriage not as the union of hearts, but as the ultimate gambit in a court riddled with ambition. In her mind, there was no room for naive trust, only the cold assurance that the crown would never forsake her. So, in the final stanza of her sovereign song, Elizabeth chose solitude over affection, preferring the immutable loyalty of her throne to the precarious promises of the human heart. And as you drift towards sleep, remember reason number 10, the Queen's deepest, most sombre secret, that her greatest fear was not death or invasion, but the ever-present possibility that genuine love simply did not exist for her. Now that we have unravelled the 10 profound and unsettling reasons, Elizabeth I refused every suitor from her childhood traumas to her obsessive need for control, from the terror of childbirth to the religious and foreign threats. It is time to turn our gaze to the tangible aftermath of her solitary reign. Elizabeth's steadfast choice never to marry, and her deliberate decision not to secure an heir, did not merely shape her personal legend as the Virgin Queen. These choices cast a long, dark shadow over England's economic health, long after the echoes of courtly intrigue had faded. In the decades following her refusal to accept any matrimonial bond, a chilling climate of political uncertainty gripped the realm. Noblemen and merchants, once eager to finance grand projects from new docks and shipyards to ambitious road and canal works, found themselves paralyzed by doubt. Who would wear the crown when Elizabeth's candles finally guttered out? That question hung over every investment, like a storm cloud blotting out the Sunday. Railway schemes that might have knitted the northern shires to London lay dormant in copper-bound ledgers. Plans for expanding the great ports at Plymouth and Dover, vital gateways to the Atlantic and to continental trade, were repeatedly shelved, postponed from spring to summer, then to the next year, and the year after that, until the hulls of those merchant ships rotted in harbour. Investors, wary of committing gold and silver to long-term ventures, redirected their capital into short-term bets, stashing specie in private vaults instead of funding the nation's infrastructure. The very arteries of commerce, the roads and bridges that carried wool and grain from the countryside to the mills and markets, were left to crumble under winter's frost. The real estate market suffered a similar malaise. Livery companies and country squires postponed the restoration of ancestral manors for fear that, when a new monarch ascended, they might lose favour or worse, attract scrutiny from a successor eager to redistribute lands. A grand rebuilding of York's city walls, once set to rival those of Antwerp, was abandoned amid disputes in Parliament over whether to levy fresh taxes for a potential regency council. From 1595 to 1603, banks found themselves in illiquid straits, assessing political risk more than profitability. Loans once extended on the promise of steady tolls from turnpike trusts were called in, and the machinery of credit ground almost to a halt. Meanwhile, the royal coffers, fat with customs duties on wool exports in Elizabeth's early years, began to dwindle. The waiting game effect, where courtiers and landholders hesitated to tie up their fortunes, led to a steady decline in revenues from annual land taxes and excise duties. With the Crown's budget stretched thin, belated attempts to impose supplemental levies met fierce resistance in the Commons. Debates raged over whether Parliament should authorise new taxes to fortify the Navy in anticipation of a succession crisis, or hold off until the rightful heir was proclaimed. This tug-of-war produced intermittent policy paralysis. Coastal defences were left undermanned, and pirates operating out of Dunkirk and the Frisian coasts grew bolder, attacking merchant convoys in the Channel and North Sea with impunity. The knock-on effects rippled through maritime commerce. English merchants, unable to rely on adequate convoy protection, turned to foreign vessels for transport, paying premiums of 20 to 30% above standard freight rates. These surcharges eroded England's competitiveness in spice, tobacco, and cloth markets, forcing traders to accept thinner margins or risk losing contracts altogether. The loss of market share in Antwerp, once England's chief trading partner on the continent, was particularly keenly felt. By the time James VI of Scotland crossed the border to claim the English throne in March of 1603, the cracks in the economic foundation were laid bare. The new Stuart monarch inherited not only the crown but also a national ledger cluttered with unfinanced projects, unpaid bounties to seamen, and mounting debts to Italian bankers. It took years of careful fiscal management and, some might argue, a measure of divine providence to restore the flow of commerce and repair the ravaged infrastructure Elizabeth left behind. Thus, while Elizabeth I's reign is often celebrated for its cultural flourishing and naval victories, the final 8 years of her reign stand as a cautionary tale, a reminder that political theatre and personal resolve may win the day. But when a ruler's most intimate decisions cast a pall of uncertainty, it is the kingdom's economy and its people who ultimately bear the weight. And so, with the stage set by those 10 harrowing reasons, we now proceed to explore in detail the economic consequences of a queen who chose the solitude of spinsterhood over the stability of succession. Drifting from the cold realities of economic strife and political intrigue, we enter the warm glow of legend and artistry where Elizabeth's enduring image took shape. Though her refusal to marry cast a long shadow over England's finances, Elizabeth I cultivated a cultural legacy that outlasted empires. The myth of the Virgin Queen, an icon of selfless devotion to her people and her realm, she deftly wove her personal vow of chastity into a tapestry of divine right. By presenting herself as wedded only to England, Elizabeth tapped into deeply rooted beliefs in the sacred sanction of monarchy. Her unbroken vow became proof that her power derived not from marriage alliances, but from a higher, almost mystical source. The Tudor line, she suggested, was anointed by God, and she, its singular emblem, stood above the quarrels and compromises of earthly unions. In the decades following her death, writers and artists seized upon this symbolism. William Shakespeare, whose career blossomed in Elizabeth's reign, embedded traces of her solitary sovereignty into his tragic heroes and heroines. In Hamlet, the ghost of an unavenged father and a daughter, torn between duty and desire, mirror Elizabeth's own conflict between affection and authority. In Romeo and Juliet, the poignant tension between public duty and private love echoes the Queen's perpetual balancing act. Though Shakespeare never named his inspiration, audiences sensed the presence of a monarch whose heart remained forever apart. Portrait painters Nicholas Hilliard and George Gower distilled the Virgin Queen image into visual form. Their canvases presented Elizabeth in gowns lavishly embroidered with pearls, symbols of purity, yet elaborately fashioned to convey regal separation. A small cameo of an ivory trinket might hide her secret. A tightly pinned hood, a high ruff framing her face, an almost imperceptible distance between her and the viewer. These portraits were more than likenesses. They were political declarations, each brushstroke affirming her unique status as ruler, mother only to her nation. Beyond courtly circles, folklore wrapped Elizabeth in layers of maternal legend. She became mother of the nation, a figure mourned in ballads and whispered prayers. Stories circulated that, upon finding a lost child's slipper on the path at Greenwich, Elizabeth wept for the future generations she could not bear. Villagers recounted that she once paused her royal procession to comfort an orphan, as if her heart yearned for the family she refused to create. These tales, whether true or romantic invention, humanized the Queen and laid the groundwork for her mythic stature. Yet the same legends that celebrated her devotion obscured deeper wounds. The narrative of a benevolent, motherly sovereign glossed over the profound loneliness that haunted Elizabeth's private hours. The people's affection masked a gulf of mistrust between ruler and ruled a tension born of her constant vigilance and refusal to forge genuine bonds. Modern playwrights and filmmakers frequently return to this image of Elizabeth as a solitary figure perched upon the cold stones of the Tower of London or gazing through darkened windows in a Tudor chamber. The contrast between her ornate gowns and her isolated silhouette underscores the duality of her legacy. In contemporary literature and cinema, Elizabeth's story often serves as a parable of power and sacrifice. Novels depict her waking at midnight, staring at empty cradle frames, imagining a child who will never cry for her. Films linger on her reflection in the palace mirrors, her lips parting in a silent question. Have I lost myself entirely? Through these depictions, Elizabeth remains a cautionary figure, a woman who, in seeking to transcend marriage and motherhood, inadvertently became a tragic symbol of both strength and sorrow. Historians today view Elizabeth's cultural legacy as a double-edged sword. On one blade, the Virgin Queen stands as a powerful emblem of autonomy, a woman who ruled in her own right when most monarchs' identities were bound to their spouses. Feminist scholars celebrate her as a prototype of female leadership, a sovereign who refused to let marriage define or diminish her authority. On the opposite edge lies the cost, the erasure of her womanhood. By transforming her body into a political instrument, Elizabeth denied herself the private joys and vulnerabilities that accompany intimate relationships. Her mythic chastity rendered her untouchable, an icon rather than a flesh-and-blood person. In her quest to remain free of compromise, she sacrificed the very human connections that might have brought solace. Thus, England's cultural memory holds Elizabeth in a golden cage of legend. She endures in song, drama, and portrait, a queen whose image could never be tainted by earthly ties. And yet, behind each commemorative scroll and painted pearl lies the quiet ache of a solitary reign. Her legacy reminds us that power and isolation can walk hand in hand, and that the greatest myths often spring from the deepest wounds. As the candlelight dims and your mind drifts, we turn to a modern lens that sheds new light on Elizabeth's century-old trials. With advances in psychology, scholars now view Elizabeth I not merely as a powerful monarch, but as a case of complex post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic obsessive-compulsive control. Recent analyses suggest that the trauma Elizabeth endured as a child, witnessing her mother and 3 stepmothers dragged to their deaths, literally reshaped her brain. Neurological studies indicate that such early, repeated exposure to violence can hyperactivate the amygdala, the brain's threat detector, and sensitize the HPA axis, the body's stress response system. In Elizabeth's case, every mention of marriage triggered what psychologists call a freeze response, a hallmark of PTSD when the mind recoils rather than processes stressful stimuli. This helps explain why she would sit in haunted silence for hours whenever advisors broached the subject of wedding plans or heirs. Beyond the spectre of PTSD lies another modern diagnosis: traits of obsessive-compulsive disorder manifesting as extreme control. Elizabeth's court, with its mandatory marriage permission edicts, menu inspections, and correspondence censorship, functioned less like a royal household and more like a living experiment in anxiety mitigation. She demanded obsessive oversight of every detail: who courtiers could wed, what colours they could wear, even which flowers adorned the banquet tables. Such micromanagement aligns closely with contemporary definitions of OCD, where intrusive fears of disorder or betrayal compel ritualistic behaviours intended to restore a sense of safety. Academics have begun referring to Elizabeth as a prototype of the wounded woman leader, a cautionary illustration of how unaddressed trauma can twist into pathological governance. In papers published by leading journals in behavioral leadership, researchers argue that Elizabeth's personal scars became state policy. Her fear of childbirth and suspicion of political marriage, once considered mere eccentricities, are now understood as symptoms of a mind under siege. These psychological discoveries deepen our understanding of her reign. They reveal how power wielded to shield oneself from pain can backfire, creating rigidity that stifles flexibility in governance. Elizabeth's obsessive controls, intended to stave off personal betrayal, also hamstrung her court's ability to adapt to changing circumstances, from economic crises to religious reform. Her unyielding demands for absolute loyalty turned a vibrant royal household into a mental prison, where courtiers lived in constant dread of real or imagined infractions. Moreover, her PTSD-like responses to marriage discussions offer a stark lesson for modern leaders. Unresolved personal trauma can manifest as policy paralysis. Elizabeth's refusal to entertain any heirship or marital alliance stemmed not from political genius alone, but from a psyche deeply conditioned by childhood horrors. Advisors who overlooked the Queen's emotional triggers contributed to decisions that nearly plunged the realm into dynastic chaos and economic ruin. Today, Elizabeth's story features prominently in European university courses on leadership law and behavioral psychology. She serves as an archetypal case study in power distortion, illustrating the perils of conflating authority with control. Professors emphasize that effective leadership requires not only strategic acumen, but also emotional intelligence. The capacity to share power, trust collaborators, and manage personal wounds rather than project them onto the state. In seminars, students debate how Elizabeth's reign might have differed if she had recognized and treated her trauma. Could she have embraced a supportive spouse or designated a trusted heir? How might her ministers have better navigated her freeze responses around marriage talk? These discussions underscore a key modern insight. Leadership flourishes not when one clings ever tighter to control, but when one learns to relinquish control in healthy ways, forging authentic connections even in the corridors of power. Elizabeth's legacy thus transcends her era. She stands as a reminder that the greatest strength of a leader lies in balancing authority with vulnerability, in acknowledging one's own scars rather than sealing them behind royal decree. In the quiet moments before sleep, reflect on her dual role as icon and cautionary tale, a sovereign whose personal demons shaped a nation, and whose story urges today's leaders to wield power with empathy, not fear. As the flicker of Elizabeth's candlelight fades into the gentle hush of history's corridors, we can let our minds drift away from the courtly intrigues and heavy decisions that weighed upon her restless heart. In this quiet moment, imagine the velvet night wrapping itself softly around you, carrying away the echoes of royal footsteps and whispered council debates. Here, in the stillness, we find the true grace of her story, not in the glittering jewels or thunderous decrees, but in the fragile lesson that power, when born of pain and fear, can become its own prison. Elizabeth I was more than a warrior queen crowned in splendor. She was a woman shaped by the deepest wounds of childhood, the relentless fear of mortality, and an unrelenting need to command every shadow of her realm. She turned those wounds into policies that transformed marriage into a minefield, virginity into a diplomatic weapon, and the future of an entire nation into a hostage held by her own anxieties. And yet, as the years wore on, those very policies cast dark shadows over England's coffers and whispered hints of succession crises that nearly fractured her kingdom. But even within this tapestry of solitude and sorrow, a glimmer of wisdom emerges, one that reaches across the centuries to touch our own lives. The quiet truth is that lasting leadership is not built on walls of isolation, but on bridges of connection, trust, and shared purpose. When we allow our personal scars to harden into barriers, we risk turning our greatest strengths into silent prisons. It is only by acknowledging our vulnerabilities, by opening our hearts to others, and by weaving a network of empathy and cooperation that we can transform pain into a force for collective growth. So as you settle into your own restful evening, let Elizabeth's story become a gentle reminder that no one need bear their burdens alone. Whether you lead a team, guide a family, or simply navigate your own path, remember that the truest measure of strength lies in our willingness to share, to listen, and to heal together. Close your eyes, feel the slow rhythm of your breath, and allow the last vestiges of tension to ebb away, carried off by the soft night air. In a moment, the final candle will gutter out, and the image of a solitary queen, however poignant, will dissolve into darkness, leaving behind only the quiet promise of tomorrow's dawn. And as that curtain of night draws fully across our thoughts, know that even the greatest of legends can yield the simplest of truths, that connection, trust, and compassion are the threads that bind us, stitch by stitch, into something stronger and more enduring than power alone. Sleep now, dear listener, wrapped in the gentle peace of understanding, and when you awaken, carry with you the lesson that no crown real or imagined can replace the warmth of shared humanity. If tonight's tale has stirred your heart, whisper your support by subscribing to our channel, where each new video offers another window into history's hidden corners and the timeless wisdom they hold. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with light.